Well, we talked about what cells do when they're dividing, but you know that cells don't divide all the time. We divide a lot when you're growing, and that makes sense. You start out really tiny, and then eventually you get to the size that you need to be. So that's a time that your cells are always dividing. But you probably don't know this, but your body's always repairing cells, getting rid of old cells and replacing them with new cells. For instance, your skeleton replaces itself every 5 to 7 years. So your skull all the way down to your toes, 5 years ago, maybe 7 years ago, you had a completely different skeleton than you do now. It could be getting stronger if you exercise more, or it could be getting a lot weaker if you're getting older and you don't exercise as much. So the cell cycle is going to be working all the time, but it works only in cells that either have to be replaced, or let's say you have some sort of damage, a paper cut, surgery or something. You're going to go ahead and have to replace those damaged cells immediately. And that's another time that this is going to happen. The two main phases for the cell cycle is going to be interphase and mitotic phase. The interphase is where the cell will grow and do all the things it needs to do, the metabolism. The cell undergoes its normal functions, so this is where a cell is just going to do whatever it needs to do. So if you have a liver cell, it's going to do the things a liver should do. If you have a pancreas cell, it's going to do all the normal functions of a pancreas. Most of your body is right now in interphase. It's waiting to, it's just doing its normal tasks. And then if there's a situation where some cells get damaged and have to be replaced, or some just get old and die, that's when it's going to go into the next couple of phases. So if it realizes that, yes, it's time for me to go and divide, cells will then grow and prepare for cell division. It takes up about 90% of that cell cycle time-wise, and there's 3 different phases that go through that. There's going to be a G1, the growth phase, an S phase, synthesis phase, G2, and then eventually when all the little checkpoints check out, we'll be able to go to our next phase, which is called mitotic phase. And that's where the cell is going to go from 1 to 2. So here's the big map, and we're going to kind of discuss each of these sort of slowly. We start out right here. This is a cell that's decided to divide, and it could have decided to divide because you're getting bigger. Some cells nearby have died, and now it has to replace those cells. So first thing happens is the body says, yes, go ahead and divide. It's going to start to grow. That's this G1 phase. You can see that from here to here it's gotten bigger. It's gotten a lot more sugars. It's gotten a lot more energy because the next couple of phases require a lot of energy. The S phase stands for synthesis, and it's synthesizing the DNA, and it's going to go from this one cell, so one chromosome, and it doubles. See how it has 2 sides now? This is a real simple cell. Normally you have a lot more chromosomes. You have 46, but just for this little picture, I've made it so you have, 1 copy of the chromosome, and it's gone to 2 copies of the chromosome. If I were to show you 23 or 46 that it doubles, I think it'd just get too confusing. So what then happens is the cell gets ready to prepare again, and this is going to be the growth phase, G2. Eventually what's going to happen is if everything checks out at each of these phases, we have sort of a quality control check that goes through, and if everything passes those quality controls, so like for instance between here and here, if the DNA is perfect, we're able to go on. If the DNA has some sort of mistakes or errors, what will happen is it'll either have the time to repair those errors, or it's going to just terminate the cell and sort of start all over again. But let's say everything checked out. We're about to go into our mitosis phase. Can you see how small this slice is in the pie? This part takes about 90% of the time, and this part, which is really quick, is going to take up maybe 10%. And that's going to be the mitosis phase. That's going to be that prophase, metaphase, anaphase, and telophase. And at the end of this, you'll notice two things have happened. One is that that chromosome has gone from that doubled copy number back down to the single numbers. And this cell is getting ready to divide, so there are going to be two cells. And eventually, when we're done, we're going to go on our merry way. So these two cells will either be neighbors or whatever. So let's go over the quick phases, and then we'll kind of do the mitosis in another video. Interphase really does have 3 steps. The first one is growth phase 1, or G1. The cell grows, more organelles are made, and it's made because when we do go into our next phase, we're going to have to double our Golgi apparatuses and double our rough ERs and things like that. So there's a lot of energy that's produced at G1. At the S phase, that's going to be where we synthesize our DNA, and our DNA goes from 1 copy to 2. It's a doubled copy. It's attached at this little point called a centromere. Centromere just means it's the central location where they attach. And it just makes it so when we can line up this chromosome, let's say this is chromosome 3. When we make the copy, we know that this side is chromosome 3 and this side is chromosome 3. So when we split the cells, or when we split the chromosomes, we know one of these copies of chromosome 3 will go to one direction, and one of the copies of chromosome 3 will go to the other direction. And then finally, growth phase is G2. We're going to go ahead and just make a bunch of proteins and really get ready for mitosis. Mitosis has some really specific proteins and some things that go on, and they need to be produced and made. So when we go through this process, everything will run smooth. In our next video, we'll talk about mitosis.